All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 235. And today, we gotta talk about some Dark Sun. It's gonna get weird, guys. So, Wizards of the Coast recently released into Underearth Arcana what they call the apocalyptic subclasses. And those three subclasses are the Circle of Preservation Druid, the Gladiator Fighter, and the Defiled Sorcerer. Defiled Sorcerer. Oh, and the Sorcerer King Patron. Now, Circle of Preservation. You could argue that it sounds like a very druidy thing. Like that. What does that have to do with Dark Sun at all? Gladiator Fighter. Gladiator's been popular in D&D and TTRPGs for a while. Gladiators go back to like the Roman Empire, and we all know that men always think about the Roman Empire for some. I've never understood that meme, but sure, whatever. But then we get to Defiled Sorcery. That's Dark Sun. And then if you wanted to get any more obvious, the Sorcerer King Patron for Warlocks. Sorcerer Kings are inherently Dark Sun. It is obvious to me now they're making a Dark Sun 5th edition book. And from what I see here, I am worried. And the reason why, I guess we should start off with what's Dark Sun. For anyone who doesn't know, in the early 90s, I believe it's 91, they released a campaign setting. I believe it was like the second. No, I'm thinking of 4th edition. I can't remember how many campaign settings had come out before for 2nd edition, but they released a box set. It was called the Dark Sun box set, and it included a campaign setting and a bunch of other things. And what it did is it introduced us to the world of Athas. Now, later on through books, there was also a bunch of books that were published for Dark Sun that were actually really, really good. And over the years, the history of the world of Athas has been expanded upon. It's actually a really interesting thing. Forever ago, the planet was, I think, green, if I remember correctly. My brain's not working right now. And then some stuff happened and it turned blue, and then some more stuff happened and it turned into the desert world that it is today. And the entire idea behind Dark Sun was to create a non D&D campaign setting, because up to that point, like, all the D&D worlds kind of had a similar feeling. Greyhawk and Mystara and even Ravenloft, while it was different, still felt very samey. Like, it was a different situation that you were putting the exact same people with the exact same experiences into. And Dark Sun was meant to shake things up. Every single one of the races in the Dark Sun was meant to break the tropes that the original race was built on. Everything about the Dark Sun setting was meant to be oppressive, and like, Dark Sun is an example of the bad guys winning. The whole thing that led to the world of Dark Sun as it is in the 2e campaign setting and then the 4e campaign setting and even the revised campaign setting from Ratatouille, it all happened because there was this extremely powerful character named Rajat, who decided that all the myriad of races that exist on Athos needed to be killed off so that the halflings could retake over the world. And so he created 13 champions who each champion, their entire purpose was to commit a mass genocide of a singular race. One of them, the Butcher of Dwarves, failed, realized that after Rajat finished killing off all the other inferior races, was also going to kill them off, rallied the other champions of Rajat together to overthrow him, and then sacrificed a massive number of slaves to turn himself into a dragon so that he could keep Rajat imprisoned eternally. And in order to do that, every single one of the remaining city-states was required to give him a yearly sacrifice of 1,000 slaves, and he would rip the life force out of their body to continue the shield that kept Rajat imprisoned. So literally, the bad guys won, and then they overthrew the baddest guy, and then took over the rest of the world. Dark Sun is meant to be oppressive and ugly and just not a fun place to be in. Elves are massively xenophobic, lying, and short. Halflings are ferocious, wild, and cannibalistic. They introduced new races, half giants, which were this magical combination of human and giant, meant to be really good fighters. The moles were the exact same thing. They were forced crossbreeding between humans and dwarves. That were technically they were a humanoid version of what's called a mule. If you're not familiar with like equines in general, there are horses and there are donkeys, and you can actually crossbreed them and get what's called a mule. Now, the interesting thing about a mule is mules are all sterile, and the reason for that is horses and donkeys have a different number of chromosomes, but they're close enough that they can produce an offspring. But because the offspring has, because all of our chromosomes are set in pairs, because they have different numbers of chromosomes, because the offspring has a chromosome that doesn't have a pair, it becomes sterile. And that's what moles are. That's why they're called moles, because it's a play on the word mule. And the reason that mules are bred is because they get you the kind of brilliance, to be perfectly honest, of the horse, with all the kind of physical characteristics of the donkey, because donkeys are stronger, can do a lot of things. And so that's mules are just work animals. Like that's the entire reason that they are bred, is to be work animals, and that's what moles are. So the world of Dark Sun is this incredibly dark, disgusting place that if you can survive in it, you feel really great because you are fighting against not just like bad people, you are fighting against a world where bad people won. So that's kind of the point of the Dark Sun. And so when I look at these classes, I get some hesitancy because they're a pretty massive departure from what these things that they're trying to imitate have been in previous versions of the Dark Sun, and that leads me to believe that we're going to get effectively another like Spelljammers, where Spelljammers wasn't a bad book, but it wasn't a great spell Spelljammer's book. I enjoyed it. You know, watch my in-depth review. I think it's a great book, and I think it's really fun. However, when you actually compare it to the older Spelljammer's book, they did water down a lot of aspects of spelljamming in general to make it more palatable to what the people that were running D&D at the time thought was the quote-unquote modern audience. By the way, the modern audience is a myth. And we've seen time and time again, things that are created specifically for a modern audience tend to not do super well. So let's talk specifics. So let's talk about Preservers versus Defilers. In Dark Sun, if you use arcane magic, because the world itself doesn't work the way that other worlds work, and magic doesn't work the way that other worlds work, what happens is if you try to cast spells, you have to get that magic power from somewhere. And so Defilers literally just pull magical energy out of the ground around them to power their magic spells. And that's one of the things that's kind of that's been blamed for why Athos is this just massive desert, is because these Defilers went around and just not only like drew all the magic out of the plant life, but when a Defiler casts a magic spell, the place that they cast it, if you look in the second edition box set, they actually had rules specifically talking about the idea that like they had rules for how big an area would be defiled depending on the level of the spell that you're casting, and they specifically mentioned any plant life that is defiled in that way turns into this really, really fine gray dust. And so, and every time you cast another spell in that area, the area that was defiled gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And even once the gray dust is gone, the ground itself, all of the nutrients, all the stuff that plants need to grow has been completely drained out of it. It is not just you're killing plant lives, you are desecrating that ground so that plant life can't grow there. And depending on how badly it's defiled, it may be years before anyone can even attempt to make something grow there. So that's what defiling is it literally rips the magic area out of the plants. Preservers, on the other hand, learn how to cast arcane magic in a way that doesn't permanently damage the wildlife. Again, because of just how magic works on Athos, you do have to draw the power for your spells from the nature around you. But if you are very, very careful, you can do it in a way that doesn't permanently damage the plants. And so that's what preservers do. And from a mechanical standpoint, in the second edition version of it, preservers were just presented as, well, they are wizards from the player's handbook. Like that's how you can do it. There were some slight modifications. I'm gonna look again before I say the wrong thing. That's fourth edition. There we go. Second edition. Sahul's book. Races, classes. Priest classes, road wizard. Class description. Gladiator, Defiler, Illusionist. So, Preservers. Dark Sun Preservers are treated just as the mages described in the player's handbook. They may specialize freely. A preserver is blah blah. In all cases where the rules here don't contradict them, the rules about mages in the player's handbook should be used. And then they specifically show Illusionist, which is one of the specialized mages that you could be in second edition. So, effectively, from a mechanical standpoint, preservers were just mages from second edition, but defilers had a completely different leveling table. That was another thing in second edition, is different classes leveled at different ways. And they had to deal with the defiling spellcasting rules, which again was really interesting. So yeah, from a mechanical standpoint, defilers generally gained levels faster, but in addition to destroying the ground, they also would do this thing anytime they cast a defiling spell, all vegetation would be destroyed. But in addition to that, any humanoid creature or anything else in that area other than the defiler would get a penalty to their initiative score based on the level of the spell and stuff like that, as they got hit by immense pain. Specifically say, any creature in the area, however, suffers great pain. Effects on living creatures. Though only plants are destroyed within the radius, living creatures are caused great pain. Any being in the radius of a defiler's magic suffers an immediate initiative modifier penalty equal to the level of the defiler spell cast. No matter how high the resulting initiative roll, though, the pain can never keep a character from performing an action during a round. The initiative penalty only postpones when the action occurs. Defiling magic was literally that. You were defiling the world every time you cast a magic spell. And wizards in general basically were all arcane casters for the most part. So now, when we look at what a defiler does in the Unearthed Arcana, once per turn, when you roll damage for a spell you cast using a spell slot, you can siphon your life energy into the spell and empower it. Roll a number of your unexpended hit point dice up to a number equal to half the level of the spell slot expended to add the total roll to one damage roll of the spell. Those hit point dice are then expended. So, I need to take a drink. They're doing something that I actually really enjoy, the idea of using hit point dice as a limited resource. It's something that 5th edition really has never done anything with, and because of just how 5th edition works, not a whole lot of people use their hit dice almost at all. Like, I did the D&D Adventures League for years. I ran dozens, if not hundreds of games. Yeah, I guess it would have been hundreds of games. The amount of times that my players used their hit dice to heal on a short rest was so incredibly limited. It just wasn't a thing that was really happening. And they were used for literally nothing else. So that in and of itself is kind of interesting. However, that's not what defiling is. Defiling doesn't drain your own life. In fact, the idea of defiling magic was specifically the wizard screwing over everybody else to help themselves. This is, by definition, the exact opposite of defiling. Like that, I could even see that being more of a preserver ability as opposed to a defiler ability. But that's not the end of the ability. Instead of drawing on your own life force when you use this feature, you can try to steal life from another creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. That creature makes a con save against your spell save DC. Creatures that have immunity to the exhausted condition automatically succeed in a save. On a failed save, in place of rolling your hit point dice, roll a number of the creature's unexpended hit point dice up to a number equal to half the level of the slot extended. You then add that total roll to one damage roll of the spell, and those hit point dice are expended from the creature. Once a creature fails its save against lifesteal, you can't use lifesteal again until you finish a long rest, unless you expend 3 sorcery points. No action required to restore your use of it. So you can use it to drain hit dice from monsters. Monsters have hit dice. They always have. They're completely useless to them. They're really only there as a way for you to modify the hit points of the monster. It tells you how many hit dice it is, and that basically gives you a range of how many hit points it should have. It's also useful if you're trying to build your own monsters, which D&D never really tells you how to do. But by knowing how many hit dice a particular challenge rating monster is supposed to have, you can kind of figure out how many hit points would be appropriate for it. But NPCs and monsters don't use their hit points. They even have a note here that says monsters, like player characters, have hit point dice. The size and number of a monster's hit dice are typically denoted in the monster stat block as part of the parenthetical after the monster's average hit points. Any creature, both character and monsters, can expend hit dice during a short rest to regain hit points. When a monster is first encountered, assume that it hasn't expended any of its hit dice. So, theoretically, if your monsters lasted for more than one encounter, they could take a short rest and heal themselves. They don't, though. That's not what they're designed to do. So this goes against most of how defilers have been described. And it's a sorcerer subclass. There are multiple arcane casters in D&D 5th edition. You've got bards, you've got wizards, you've got sorcerers, and you've got warlocks. All of them use arcane spell casting. All of them in Dark Sun would have to choose to either preserve or defile whenever they cast a spell. But this limits defiling exclusively to a sorcerer, and all it does is let you add a little bit of additional power from that level 3 feature. It gets further. In addition to that, you get a bunch of defiler spells, which are mostly necrotic damage. So level 3, you get blindness, deafness, inflict wounds, ray of enfeeblement, and ray of sickness. 5, bestow curse, vampiric touch. 7, blight, hallucinatory terrain. That one's kind of weird. And then 9, anti-life shell and contagion. These are all basically necrotic damage based spells, which isn't what defiling is. Defilers are not necromancers. There are necromancers in Dark Sun. There is undead in Dark Sun. Necromancers can be, generally tend to be defilers because they're already defiling bodies. Why not defile nature at the same time? But there's nothing in defiling magic that is designed to be necrotic in nature. Yeah, so we keep going on. You eventually get Defiler's Ward. When you use a bonus action to turn sorcery points into a spell slot, it gives you temporary hit points that if a creature hits you while you have those temporary hit points, they take either necrotic or poison damage equal to your charisma modifier. And damage dealt by your sorcerer spells and sorcerer features ignore resistance to necrotic and poison damage. So the defiled sorcerer is a necrotic poison sorcerer. It's not a defiler. And it keeps going on. Withering Aura and superior defiler. It all effectively is just built around the idea of necrotic damage and poison damage. That's it. It's not a defiler. It doesn't introduce the idea of defiling. I mean, again, in 2nd edition, defiling was kind of mostly a story feature. Like the one mechanical thing was, how big an area that plants were killed in, and the initiative detriment. But when you go to the 4th edition Dark Sun, version of defiling. First things first. Every character that could cast arcane spells, if you were in Dark Sun, had access to what was called Arcane Defiling, which basically just allowed you to re-roll an attack roll on a daily attack power, but each ally within 20 squares of you takes necrotic damage equal to half his or her healing surge value. And this damage ignores immunity and cannot be reduced in any way. So it literally was ripping ripping power from your allies, ripping life from your allies to strengthen your spells. So that kind of fits into that first aspect of it, though not quite the same, because again, people don't generally use their hit dice. And then when you go even further, where was it? Was it under Templar? There was there's a Paragon path called Master Defiler. And it basically expanded how often you could use your arcane defiling. It allowed you to use your arcane defiling to actually cause some damage to enemies as well. And just basically gave you kind of more stuff that you could do by kind of drawing stuff out of. In the 4th edition version of it, it wasn't as much it wasn't as much plant life as it was just ripping life out of creatures in general. And because you were dealing with life, a lot of the damage was necrotic. But again, it was something that was not limited specifically to a sorcerer, and it was all arcane magic just in general. And then they also had an epic destiny called a Dragon King. The ultimate goal for most defilers was to do exactly what Boris, the Butcher of Dwarves, did, is to eventually turn into a dragon. And in order to do that, that was the other thing that was kind of interesting lore-wise in Dark Sun, is becoming a dragon required you to master defiling magic, also to master what was called a dragon magic. And then you had to go through this very, very long process that slowly changed your body into an actual dragon that also involved a lot of bad stuff and killing random people. It was just not great. So the Dragon King Epic Destiny basically allowed you to do that. And it just gave you more dragon abilities and also just kind of improved your arcane defiling to doing more and more cool stuff. It's a really cool thing. 4th edition is amazing, guys. Everybody needs to play it. So when we go back to this isn't a defiler. It's an extremely watered down version that doesn't really, and again, with D&D 5.5's aversion to lore in general, I don't see them putting the massive amount of lore needed to kind of turn this into real defilers, traditional defilers that are kind of hated in the world of Athos. Now we can also go to the Circle of Preservation Druid. This is the one that is most upsetting to me because, again, preservers are arcane spellcasters. They generally gain levels slower than defilers, but they also aren't screwing over the land. However, outside of the area that halflings live in, most people see just any arcane magic user as a defiler, whether or not you're a preserver. So there's this kind of prejudice against arcane spellcasters just in general because of just how bad defilers are. So, Circle of Preservation Druid, druids are not preservers. Druids don't use arcane magic, so they can't be preservers. And then when we look at the actual thing, basically, what the Circle of Preservation Druid gets is they can use their wild shape to create a little area that heals their allies and gives them other kind of benefits. So it's kind of a healing support style druid, which isn't what a preserver is. If we look at the again, the second edition preserver is just a wizard or a mage. The fourth edition flavor of the preserver, again, they didn't have a preserver class, but they did have themes. They introduced these things called themes in the Dark Sun campaign setting, which basically what they were was kind of like a subclass for your character, but your theme was not limited to a specific class. They were kind of like generic subclasses. And generally what would happen with a theme is you would get a an inherent power built into the theme. And it was just an extra ability that you got to use. And then also, as you leveled up, you would have the choice to either choose your normal power options, or you could choose a power from your theme, which was going to let you do cool things. So, one of the themes was Veiled Alliance, which basically the Veiled Alliance was a group of I guess you could call, they were kind of like the Harpers. They protected preservers, and they were a secret society that kind of espoused the ideals of preserving and stuff like that. But there was a Paragon path called Master Preserver. And one of the things that you could do with it was your Master Preserver spell that you got at level 11 when you chose it was called Vital Spell. You can use one of your arcane at-will attack powers as a free action. If you hit, you deal a d10 extra damage, and you or one ally within 10 squares of you can spend a healing surge. So it was an arcane spellcaster, but by manipulating arcane energies, they could actually strengthen their allies and help them to heal. They could also shield their allies. Like it was a very cool Paragon path, and it could be paired with any arcane class. So you could pair it with an arcane leader class, which I have to remember the various leader classes to think. I think Bard was an arcane leader, meaning they were a healer. So you could do that, but you could also just be a standard wizard or an elementalist that took the preserver Paragon path, and now you could both do damage and also heal and protect it the exact same time. And it was a really cool thing. And then I believe for the Epic Destinies, they also had... Where are the Epic Destinies? There they are. So, Avignon, I think... Yeah. So the Epic Destiny for Preservers is called Avignon, or Avagion, but it looks French, so I'm pronouncing it French with Avignon. And yeah, it was basically just cool stuff that you could do being a master preserver style thing. But it was a little bit more kind of healing focused. So in that aspect, I kind of understand going with the the kind of protection and healing focus. And since druids are already kind of nature focused, like, oh, preservers could be druids. But that's not how it works. Druids do exist in Dark Sun. Druid was a class in 2nd edition. Druids existed in Dark Sun. So did clerics. And the way that druids and clerics worked was they, because there were no deities, they worshipped elemental spheres, and they were massively cool. Basically, what would happen in 2nd edition is you would choose an elemental sphere, and what that meant is you had a different spell list and different weapons that you were allowed to use as a cleric. You basically had access to the spells from your sphere and what was called the cosmic sphere, which are kind of your generalized cleric spells. And so, like, fire elemental clerics were very much aggressive. They were actually allowed, because old school cleric rules, you generally couldn't use, like, bladed weapons and things like that. Because you're a cleric. You're a good guy. You can't be cutting people up. Fire clerics could use any flaming weapon. As long as it was on fire, they could use it. And they got access to all these really cool fire spells. Wind clerics were allowed to use innumerable number of ranged weapons because they traveled through the air and stuff like that. So you could create these really cool ranged clerics. For druids, they also had to choose a sphere of influence, but they also had to choose effectively very similar to how circles work in 5th edition. But they didn't just choose like Circle of the Land or Circle of Fungus or something. They literally chose a piece of land that it was their job to protect it. And if they went too far away from their chosen plot of land, they lost a lot of their abilities. So druids were specifically designed around, I am a guardian of nature, and specifically, I'm a guardian of this nature. This is mine. You don't get to do bad things here. And while they were within their area, that I can't remember what it's called, let's go to character classes. Priest, druid. I want to see if I can actually find the actual description of druids in here. Wizard, defiler, illusionist, priest, cleric, druids. Every druid must choose one geographic feature to be his guarded lands. The geographic feature that a druid might make his guarded lands can vary wildly. Lower level druids may travel widely in the world. During their time of wandering, they learn about this stuff. Upon reaching 12th level, the druid's time of wandering has come to an end. From that time forward, the druid must spend half of his time on his guarded lands, watching over them and protecting them. The rest of the time, higher level druid must again travel the world, keeping tabs on trends that might threaten nature in general and his guarded lands in particular. So that's what it was. And again, they had to dedicate themselves to a particular element. You had sphere of earth, air, fire, and water. Apparently, Mati was not a part of this group, and there is no sphere of heart. Go planet! That's what druids were, and that's how clerics worked. And they were super amazing and cool. And now they are limiting preserving magic, which is not something druids ever did. They used natural magic, elemental magic from the elemental spheres, and now they're turning it into the Circle of Preservation Druid, which is a huge, huge letdown. It's not how it's supposed to work, and it's dumb. It's not that the class itself is bad. Like, it's interesting. It allows you to use your wild shape feature differently, which I enjoy. It's just, it's not a preserver. And if this is what we can expect from the 5th edition version or the 5.5 version of druids, I said this before when they talked about wild talents. I'm like, guys, if you make a Dark Sun book, I'm buying the book. I will buy a Dark Sun book. However, you fuck up Dark Sun, I'm done with 5th edition. Like, it's just, I will not buy any more of the books. You guys have burned me for the final time. If this is what we can expect from a 5th edition Dark Sun book, I believe I'm going to be burned and I will be done with 5th edition. Might come back for 6th edition, who knows, but 5th edition at that point is dead. And this is not a preserver. The way that it should work, like if I was designing a 5.5 version of Dark Sun, I would make an alternate set of rules for spellcasting. Anyone that uses arcane magic, so wizards, sorcerers, bards, we're going to talk about warlocks in a second here, because the warlock pack that they put in here is actually fantastic. And it works better than the 2nd edition version of Templars, is basically what they were, where they got spells specifically from their Sorcerer King. Any wizard, sorcerer, or bard that casts spells in a Dark Sun world has to choose either to preserve or defile. And there would be benefits and drawbacks to each. Defilers, I think it would make the most sense that defilers get possibly like extra spells per day. Or they can empower spells through defiling, but it destroys the land around you. And if there's not enough ambient energy in the land around you, you have to find a different way to do it, which is kind of similar to what they have here for the sorcerer. So that in and of itself, okay, but it can't just be a sorcerer subclass. It has to be everybody, because that's how the world works. And then preservers, you don't have to worry about drawing spells, but maybe either you get less spells per day, or you use the spells in a different way. I kind of like the things that they did in 4th edition, where you could use a spell and then also heal or something like that. Because lore-wise, that was effectively how preserving worked, is as you cast the spell, instead of just ripping the magic out of the plants around you and then using it to power your spells, you would take magic to power the spell, and then as the spell was kind of finished casting, you would take some of that power back and put it back into the plants. That's why preserving was more difficult to do than defiling, because you really had to have expert control over your spells. I'd even go as far as saying that a preserver sorcerer would actually kind of make a lot of sense, because the idea of them modifying the spell as they cast it really feels very intently preserver magic like. But again, it would have to be something that every arcane spellcaster has to deal with. So yeah. The final thing that I wanted to talk about, the Gladiator Fighter. The Gladiator Fighter is almost exclusively built around using weapon mastery. And I've already mentioned the weapon mastery system in theory was cool. In practice is mostly useless. There's like 3, maybe 4 weapon masteries that actually will change how you play your characters. The rest are mostly useless. And the Gladiator basically allows you to use weapon mastery features that aren't built into the weapon that you're using. And that's really all they do. It's a boring thing. Again, the idea behind it is interesting, and if the weapon mastery system is actually useful, it would be a very, very cool class, but it isn't. So that, again, doesn't really fly in the face of Dark Sun. It's a gladiator that's using stuff. It feels very Dark Sun to me. But when we get to the Sorcerer King Patron, this one feels really good. The first instance of them making Sorcerer Kings associated with Warlocks was actually in the 4th edition Dark Sun campaign setting. Because what they did in the Dark Sun campaign setting 4th edition book, they had new character options for a few of the different classes. Basically, they gave them some new powers that they could choose as they leveled up. The three or the four classes that they added new powers and things like that for were the Battle Mind, which the Battle Mind itself, if I remember correctly, was a defender, a psionic defender. So they were a psionic using tank style character. The Arena Fighter makes sense. The Animist Shaman, which was really cool. Shaman in general from 4th edition was a super interesting class. It was effectively kind of like a pet class where you would have a little kind of spirit companion that you used, and you would be able to kind of throw it out onto the battlefield and cast spells from its location and draw it back. And it was a really, really cool class. And then they had the Warlock Sorcerer King pact. And it was just so cool because when you look at the actual lore for what Templars are, in Dark Sun, a Templar is a spellcaster that gets their magic ability from a Sorcerer King. And Sorcerer Kings were effectively, a lot of them were former champions of Rajat that teamed up with Boris to take him over, and then they now run their own city states. I think one or two of them kind of came up on their own. I think Tek Tiktale wasn't a former champion of Rajat, but I might be wrong. But anyway, they would impose incredible control over magic in general, because if people were using defile magic inside this city, well, it would kill off the plant life that they needed to feed people. So they were very, very careful about it. But they did have a few people that worked directly for the Sorcerer King and were therefore given permission to defile and do other things like that. In 2nd edition, they were actually, where were they? The Templar. Gladiator, Defiler, Illusionist, Priest, Cleric, Templar. There we go. Templars were basically versions of clerics, but instead of worshipping an elemental sphere, they worshipped a sorcerer king. So again, deities don't exist in this, but the Sorcerer Kings kind of treated themselves as deities, so it kind of made sense in 2nd edition to make Templars kind of a flavor of cleric. And they were hyper lore based, and like the rules for this were things like a Templar can pass judgment on a freeman when he reaches level 7th level. So they had a bunch of role-playing abilities built into the class in addition to effectively just being a cleric. So that was okay, and it kind of made sense. When we got to 4th edition, in 4th edition, Warlock was one of the... If I remember correctly, I think Warlock was actually one of the classes introduced in... Was it Player's Handbook 4? Or Player's Handbook 1? Character classes. What classes did we have? Yeah, Warlock was one of the core classes in the first Player's Handbook. So anything that came out in for 4th edition had to at least acknowledge that Warlocks were a thing. It's another one of the other things in 4th edition Dark Sun. They introduced a race called the Dray, which were Dragonborn in Dark Sun, because Dragonborn were a base race in 4th edition, and so you had to have both Dragonborn and Eladrin, because those were also in the Player's Handbook 1. So there's Eladrin in the 4th edition Dark Sun, and there's Dragonborn. They're called Dray. So anyway, the Warlock Sorcerer King pact just fits so well, because that's exactly what they were. Whereas the cleric kind of made sense because you were worshiping them. The sorcerer kings weren't gods; they weren't deities. So granting spells kind of worked, but for a lore reason, it didn't quite really. However, warlocks don't make pacts with deities; they just make pacts with really strong spellcasters. So it makes perfect sense that a warlock could get a pact with a sorcerer king. And a lot of the stuff, like the level 1 at will power for sorcerer king pacts in 4th edition, it's called Hand of Blight. I'll just read the description. A crackling black sphere gathers around your outspread hand. You can smite a nearby foe with it or else fling it at a distant enemy. So it was either a touch or ranged attack. It did a d8 plus charisma or constitution modifier necrotic damage and psychic damage, and the target grants combat advantage until the end of your next turn. And then if you had the Sorcerer King pact, if you spent your Fell Might, which is an aspect of the Sorcerer King pact, the target takes an extra d8 of damage. And basically what it meant is every encounter you could use your Fell Might to power the rest of these abilities and do cool stuff. So you basically, it was a once an encounter limited resource that you could use to do stuff. That in and of itself is really, really cool. So going back to what they have for the Sorcerer King patron, the spells that you... First of all, you get psionic casting. When you cast a spell from the Sorcerer King spell table, you can do so without verbal or material components, except material components that are consumed by the spell or that have a cost specified in the spell. You're a psionic caster. That in and of itself is very Dark Sun. One of the ways that, especially halflings, who were very, very... their culture thrived around the idea of protecting nature. One of the ways they got around the fact that even with preserving magic, you still were doing a little bit of damage to nature. It was just healable damage. Psionics is a really, really big thing. Everybody is psionic in Dark Sun. And there were specific psionicists who their whole thing was using psionic powers, and those didn't have to worry about arcane defiling because they weren't arcane magic, they were psionics. So I like the fact that the Sorcerer King patron is a psionic caster. Then the spells that they get: Command, Compelled Duel, Hold Person, Mind Spike, and Wrathful Smite is just their level 3, the spells that they get at level 3. The other ability they get at level 3, Intimidating Presence. You gain proficiency in the Intimidation skill if you don't already have it. You also have expertise in Intimidation. So that in and of itself, kind of cool. And then Voice of Tyranny. You can cast Command as a bonus action without expending a spell slot. You can do this a number of times. You can do Charisma modifier. You regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Command is a massively fun spell in 5th edition. You give a one-word... Now, the 5.5 version of it is less useful than the 5.0 version of it. But it's still a very useful spell. And as you gain levels with the Sorcerer King patron subclass, you get cool stuff. If I remember correctly, is it... Yeah, so when you get to level 14... Whenever you cast Command, you can target one additional creature with the spell's range. Additionally, a creature frightened by you automatically fails its saving throw against any command you cast. And then between that, for level 6, basically anytime you cast a spell using one of your Pact Magic spell slots, you create a 30-foot emanation, just a 30-foot radius sphere around yourself. That either any creature in that area either gets advantage on attack rolls until the end of its next turn, or they have to succeed on a Wisdom save against your spell save DC, or have the Frighten condition until the end of its next turn. and you only get to do that once per short or long rest, which isn't great. Again, I'm not a huge fan of one and done abilities, but whatever. And then Vindictive Rebuke. When an enemy hits you with an attack roll, you can take a reaction to force the enemy to re-roll a d20. They have to use the new roll, and if this reaction turns the attack roll into a miss, the triggering creature takes psychic damage equal to your warlock level. And then you can use it a number of times if you do your charisma, you get it back on a long rest. So the whole thing about the Sorcerer King patron is they can command people, which goes straight back to the second edition of as the Templar leveled up, they could just command people and do things and had all this lore stuff. And then like Decisive Edict is just built around like fear and command, because that's what Templars were. They were commanders for that. So you could help your allies, terrify your enemies. And then Vindictive Rebuke is just Karen, the ability. And then Absolute Tyranny is even better. Like the whole thing is just a super amazing idea, and I think this fits perfectly in a Dark Sun world. The idea that Sorcerer Kings basically work as pact masters is perfect. It fits 100% into the lore. Like that is super super cool. The Defiled Sorcerer, it's not horrible, but it's not good. And the fact that it uses hit dice as opposed to actual hit points, I think really, really limits limits the impact of what you're doing. There really isn't a huge... There's never a reason not to defile if you have lifesteal available. Like, you're just taking hit dice from creatures that don't use their hit dice. It's not even a limited resource at that point. It's just free stuff. And everything else in there is just like, well, here's some extra necrotic damage. It doesn't really feel like defiling. There's no real choice. Like, defiling should feel bad. Like, making the decision to defile should make you feel bad, and there's nothing in here that makes you feel bad at all. Like, there's no downside to using defiling in this, aside from using some limited resources. That's not how defiling works. And then the preservers are not druids. Elemental druids exist. I want like, if you're going to make a Dark Sun campaign setting for 5.5, you have to have elemental clerics and elemental druids. It is an intrinsic part of the thing. Again, second edition, it was a whole different rule set. For the fourth edition version of it, they had elemental priest was a theme that you could add to your character. And then they had two different elemental priest paragon paths. They had the Rainbringer and the Smoke Crown Initiate. Basically a water elemental priest and a fire elemental priest. And then when we get to the Epic Destinies, was it? No, it wasn't Horde Master. The Pyrene. And Pyrene was a super deep cut into the Dark Sun lore, because the Pyrene were effectively halflings before halflings were halflings during the Green Age and the Blue Age. The predominant race in the world were called the Pyrene, and they learned how to shape life. Like, I did an entire video on it over a year ago now. It might have been a couple of years. Talking about like the history of the world of Athas. But the Pyrene were life shapers. They literally could mold and create life. And that's one of the things that caused Athas to be scarred, was they created this thing that eventually was called the Pristine Tower, but they used it to kind of channel the power of the sun, and they wanted to create more kind of biodiversity on the planet, but what they ended up creating was this brown fungus that started wiping out all life on the planet. And in order to fix it, they had to basically scorch the sun, which changed it from, if I remember correctly, it was a blue sun and turned it into the red sun that eventually was what, or I think it went yellow first and then something else happened and turned it into the red sun. But it permanently fucked over the planet. So yeah, the epic destiny was you got to be a Pyrene. Like, that was the ultimate the thing for kind of the elements and everything like that. So that in and of itself is just cool. So I mean, technically, it's not an epic destiny for an elemental priest. It's primal as opposed to divine, but it's still cool. Anyway. So yeah, like I said, this is not giving me a lot of hope for the Dark Sun 5th edition thing. Preservers are not druids, they are wizards. And if you want to broaden that to sorcerers and bards because they're all arcane magic users, then yes. Defilers are not exclusively sorcerers, and this version of defiling isn't defiling. It's more a necromancer than it is a defiler. It's an active necromancer where you're just ripping life out of other people to do stuff, but it's not a defiler. And then the Sorcerer King Patron is super cool. I like that. So I hope beyond all hope that this is not the permanent stuff, because I will be very, very upset. Also, Dark Sun requires psionics, and the way that psionics have worked in 5th edition has not been good. They're just spellcasting. And yeah, 4th edition had its own psionic power system that was not perfect, but it worked. And then again, in 2nd edition, when they introduced the psionics, was its own complete style of spellcasting. It was completely different. It was super cool. And for whatever reason, 5th edition just doesn't want to deal with that, and it annoys the hell out of me. Anyway, interested to hear from you guys. First of all, do I have any Dark Sun fans out there? Second of all, what do you guys think of what we've seen in this new Unearthed Arctic Arcana? Do you think I'm being a little bit harsh, or do you think, yet again, Wizards of the Coast is going to figure out a way how to completely murder a classic series that has been beloved by fans for decades? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.